In today's world, even the simplest object can sometimes ignite the most profound debates. And that was exactly what happened on a cold winter day in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, when Barron Trump, the youngest son of former President Donald Trump, just wanted to enjoy a peaceful holiday. A luxury car rolled along the gravel road leading to the Grand Crest Hotel, one of the most exclusive hotels in the Jackson Hole region. Barron Trump sat in the car, taking a deep breath, trying to savor a rare sense of tranquility. He had chosen this place partly because of its reputation for discretion and privacy. It was a haven frequented by celebrities seeking to escape the spotlight. Dressed in a simple hoodie and the familiar red MAGA cap, Barron stepped into the hotel's main lobby. The luxurious space, adorned with marble columns and crystal chandeliers, exuded an atmosphere of elegance and sophistication. A few guests glanced his way, but no one seemed overly interested. To them, he appeared to be just another young guest coming to relax. At least that's what they thought. As he approached the front desk, Barron adjusted his cap and placed his ID and credit card on the counter. The receptionist, a young man with a professional demeanor, initially greeted him warmly, but the smile quickly faded as his eyes landed on the MAGA cap. "I'm sorry, Mr. Trump," the receptionist began, his tone cautious. "Our management has a strict policy regarding politically affiliated attire. I'm afraid we cannot proceed with your check-in unless you remove the cap." Barron stood still, caught off guard by the situation. He had stayed at countless hotels wearing the same cap in even more contentious places, yet he had never encountered anything like this. "Excuse me?" Barron replied, his tone calm but firm. "Are you saying I can't stay here because of my hat?" The receptionist glanced around as if seeking backup. "This isn't personal. It's a policy we enforce to maintain a neutral environment for all guests." Barron's face remained expressionless, but inside him, a storm was beginning to brew. "I booked a suite," he responded calmly. "You've taken my money, and now you're telling me the hat is an issue?" The receptionist began to look uncomfortable. Nearby guests were starting to take notice of the exchange. Some whispered among themselves, curious about what was happening. Barron could feel their eyes on him, but he remained unfazed. "This isn't about the money," the receptionist explained. "We'll issue a full refund if necessary, but the policy must be followed." For a moment, Barron considered removing the hat just to avoid further trouble. But something about the situation unsettled him. Was this really about the hat, or was it about who he was, about his family? Crossing his arms, Barron stood his ground. "Then I guess I won't be leaving." The atmosphere in the lobby grew more tense. Staff members began murmuring among themselves, and a manager soon appeared, wearing an expression that was both apologetic and resolute. "Mr. Trump," the manager began, his tone measured, "we want to avoid causing a scene. If you'd like, we can assist in arranging accommodations for you at another hotel." Barron clenched his jaw but said nothing. He gathered his ID and credit card, then turned to leave. As he walked toward the door, the whispers behind him grew louder. Before he could reach his car, his phone began to buzz incessantly. Someone had recorded the entire incident. This was just the beginning of a media storm waiting to erupt. Sitting in the car, Barron gazed out the window, the images of the confrontation still lingering in his mind. He was used to being in the spotlight, but not like this. From a young age, he had learned to live under public scrutiny, to mask his emotions behind a calm facade. But today, that mask was beginning to crack. The MAGA hat, a seemingly simple item, had become the catalyst for a much larger controversy. To him, it wasn't just a fashion accessory or a political symbol. It was a part of his family's story, a reminder of years spent in the White House, of his father, and of his own journey toward maturity. Barron recalled the first time he wore the hat. It had been a gift from his father, not a ceremonious one, but a casual, affectionate gesture on an ordinary afternoon. "Son," his father had said, "sometimes the world won't understand us, but what matters is that we understand ourselves." Those words now held a deeper meaning. Over the years, Barron had worked to carve out his own identity, to be someone independent of the Trump name and everything it represented. He had studied diligently, striving to be the best version of himself, not for the family name, but for the desire to be recognized as his own person. But the world didn't seem ready to see him that way. To many, his every action was filtered through a political lens. A hat was no longer just a hat. It was a statement, a flag, a dividing line. And that was what exhausted him the most. Over the years, Barron had witnessed the way the world had changed, how people had grown quick to judge each other through the simplest symbols. A hat, a slogan, a hashtag. Any of these could become weapons in an unending ideological war. He wondered how many of those commenting on him truly understood who he was. Behind his composed exterior and measured reactions, Barron felt a profound loneliness. It was the loneliness of standing between two worlds, one filled with the expectations and pressures of his family's legacy, and the other with his yearning to live as a normal person. Every action he took was scrutinized, every choice a potential topic for debate on social media. His phone kept vibrating with notifications from social platforms. Every comment, every share, was another fragment of a society growing increasingly polarized. People were quick to pick sides, to pass judgment, without pausing to consider the real person behind the story. For years, Barron had worked to build his own identity, separate from the shadow of his family. Now that seemed impossible. This was no longer just about him. It had become a debate about the name he carried, the hat he wore, and the prejudices that came with both. As Barron's car pulled away from the Grand Crest Hotel, a video of the incident had already made its way online. A guest in the lobby, quick to recognize him, uploaded a short clip with the title, "Barron Trump denied stay over MAGA hat at luxury hotel." Within minutes, the video spread like wildfire on social media. Sitting in the back seat, Barron stared at his phone, watching a flood of notifications and mentions fill his screen. The comments were a mix of sympathy, outrage, and ridicule. "Good for the hotel. MAGA hats don't belong in luxury spaces." "Discrimination, plain and simple. It doesn't matter who you are. He's just a kid trying to live his life. Leave him alone." Barron scrolled through the posts aimlessly, his face betraying no emotion, though inside a whirlwind of feelings raged. Part of him wanted to ignore it all, but another part felt the sting of humiliation. While Barron sought a quiet place to process his thoughts, chaos unfolded back at the Grand Crest Hotel. The staff was in crisis mode. The manager, still shaken by the confrontation, gathered her team in the back office. "We need a statement, and we need it now," she said, her voice tense. But the situation had already spiraled out of control. The hotel's social media pages were flooded with angry messages. Longtime patrons threatened boycotts, while others praised the hotel for taking a firm stand. News outlets quickly picked up the story, each adding their own spin. To some, the hotel's actions represented a principled stance of neutrality. To others, it was blatant discrimination. The narrative depended on who was telling it. As night fell, the hotel lobby swarmed with reporters, cameras flashing incessantly. Guests complained about the disruption. The once luxurious Grand Crest had become a battleground of opposing opinions and ideals. In a hastily arranged emergency meeting, the hotel's management team debated how to handle the situation. Sarah Martinez, the executive director, sat at the head of the table, her face weary. In front of her were dozens of emails from shareholders, business partners, and VIP clients, all demanding answers. "We can't let this drag on any longer," a board member spoke up. "Every minute that passes, we're losing valuable bookings." "But if we reverse our stance now, how will we look?" Another board member countered. "Policy is policy. We can't make exceptions, just because of media pressure." Outside the hotel, a crowd had started to gather. Some held signs in support of Barron, demanding justice for what they saw as blatant discrimination. Others stood behind the hotel's decision, arguing that political symbols had no place in a neutral space. The division between the two sides was stark, and the tension was palpable. Local police had to deploy additional officers to maintain order. Amid the growing chaos, an older man in a leather jacket approached the crowd. He spoke in a calm but firm voice. Though his words were hard to hear over the noise, his presence was striking. His quiet demeanor seemed to command attention, drawing curious glances from both sides. Barron, watching the events unfold from a modest Airbnb on the outskirts of the city, felt an inexplicable sense that this man might hold the key to resolving the escalating conflict. On TV, the coverage showed the swelling crowd outside the Grand Crest Hotel, which had doubled in size since the morning. The cameras occasionally focused on the man in the leather jacket, who appeared to be acting as a mediator between the opposing factions. The story was no longer just about an incident at a hotel. It had become a flashpoint for deeper societal tensions. Television pundits dissected every angle of the situation, from the rights of private businesses to the boundaries of free speech and the right to refuse service. Hashtags like #MAGA Hotelgate and #Barron Trump trended across social media, and opinion pieces flooded major news outlets. Some praised the hotel's decision as a bold stand against divisive symbols. Others condemned it as unacceptable discrimination. The phone lines at the Grand Crest Hotel rang incessantly, with calls pouring in from both supporters and critics. Meanwhile, Barron, seeking refuge from the chaos, stayed in the modest Airbnb, watching the story spiral further out of control. As the day wore on, Barron realized that this wasn't just about him anymore. It was a reflection of a divided society grappling with its own identity, and he was caught in the middle of it all. He had chosen this place precisely because of its lack of luxury amenities, a space where he could hide away and escape prying eyes. But privacy was hard to come by when the entire world was examining you under a microscope. A news van parked outside the property, its crew waiting like vultures for a statement. Sitting at the kitchen table, Barron scrolled through his phone. Every major news outlet was covering the incident, each with its own perspective. Headlines ranged from Barron Trump denied stay in Wyoming to should politics stay out of hospitality? The weight of the situation was finally pressing down on him. This was no longer just a viral moment. It had become a cultural flashpoint. People were arguing about him, using his name to validate their opinions. Barron wasn't sure what hurt more, the rejection at the hotel or the way strangers felt entitled to define who he was. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. It was a direct message request on Instagram. Curious, he opened it and saw a message from Monica Alvarez, a journalist from a reputable independent media outlet. "Hi, Barron. I'd like to hear your story from your perspective. I think people deserve to know how you feel about all of this. Let me know if you'd like to talk." Barron stared at the message. He had avoided making any public statements about the incident so far, not wanting to fan the flames any further. But there was something different about Monica's tone. Less confrontational, more curious. For a moment, Barron considered replying, but then he closed the app and leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, lost in thought. At the Grand Crest Hotel, tensions were reaching a breaking point. The hotel's management team gathered behind closed doors in the conference room, exhausted from the relentless backlash. Their carefully worded statement, emphasizing their commitment to neutrality and guest comfort, had spectacularly backfired, with critics dismissing it as a hollow apology. "Should we just let him come back?" one staff member asked wearily. "And what happens when other guests complain?" Another countered, "We'll look weak. Policy is policy." "But this isn't about policy anymore," the manager said, rubbing her temples. "This is about the hotel's reputation. If we don't handle this the right way, we're done for." As the protests outside grew louder, the older man in the leather jacket began to shift the atmosphere of the crowd. No one knew exactly who he was, but there was something about the way he spoke that commanded attention. "You know," he began, his voice deep and measured, "I've lived long enough to see lines drawn and erased time and again. And I can tell you one thing, no line is worth forgetting our humanity." Meanwhile, at the Airbnb, Barron's longtime bodyguard Travis poked his head into the room. "There's someone here to see you," he said. He introduced himself as Jameson. "He's the guy everyone's talking about at the protests." Barron hesitated. He wasn't sure he wanted to meet anyone right now, especially someone connected to the chaos outside. But curiosity got the better of him. "Let him in," he said. Jameson entered, his presence both unassuming and magnetic. Up close, Barron noticed the lines on his face, the kind etched by years of experience and hard-earned wisdom. "I'm guessing you've been watching the news," Jameson said, gesturing toward the TV, where headlines about the incident were still rolling. "Thought I'd stop by and clear a few things up for you." Barron raised an eyebrow. "And you are?" Just someone who's seen enough to know when things are getting out of hand, Jameson replied, settling into the chair across from him. You probably think this is about the hat. But it's not, is it? Barron didn't respond immediately. He wasn't sure he had the answer. People out there are angry, Jameson continued. Some because they think you represent what they hate, others because they think you're being treated unfairly. But neither side is really listening to each other. Or to you. Barron crossed his arms. So what do you want me to do? Go out there and give a speech? That'll only make things worse. Jameson shook his head. No speeches, no theatrics. Just the truth. Tell them what you told yourself when you put that hat on today. Because right now, they're not fighting for you. They're fighting for what they think you represent. Barron frowned considering Jameson's words. He wasn't used to people speaking to him so directly, without deference or judgment. It was both refreshing and unsettling. I don't even know what I represent anymore, he admitted quietly, to myself or anyone else. Jameson nodded, as if he had expected this response. Then maybe it's time to figure that out. Not for them, for you. Barron sat in silence as Jameson stood to leave. I'll be outside if you decide to take that first step, he said, his voice calm yet firm. With that, he walked out. Barron stared at the closed door, his mind racing. For the first time in a long while, he felt the faint stirrings of clarity. Maybe this wasn't about the hat, or even the hotel. Maybe it was about taking control of his own story. The crowd outside the Grand Crest Hotel had reached a boiling point. Protesters from both sides were now separated only by a thin line of police officers, their chants growing louder and more frenzied. From a distance, Barron watched as Jameson stepped into the middle of the groups, raising his hands high in a gesture calling for calm. Cameras zoomed in on the older man, who had somehow managed to command everyone's attention. Listen, Jameson began, his voice measured but firm. You're all here because of a fight about a hat, right? But let's be honest. This isn't just about a piece of fabric. It's about what it represents to each of you. And that's where the problem starts. Barron moved closer to the screen. His curiosity piqued. Jameson's words weren't rehearsed or overly polished. They felt raw, genuine, as if spoken from a place of experience. You're yelling at each other like enemies, Jameson continued. But has anyone actually tried to listen? To ask why that hat makes some of you proud and others angry? Because until you do that, all you're doing is adding fuel to a fire that helps no one. The crowd murmured, their collective energy beginning to shift. Some lowered their signs. Others exchanged hesitant glances. Barron stepped forward, his feet carrying him toward the heart of the gathering. The lights of the cameras swung toward him, microphones tilted in his direction, and the noise of the crowd gradually faded into an incredible silence. What remained was the rustling of protest signs in the breeze and the distant hum of passing traffic. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. For years, the world had talked about him as though he were a symbol, a vessel for larger debates and conflicts. But standing here now, he felt something shift. He was no longer just a name or an image. He was a person with his own story to tell. I didn't plan for any of this, Barron began, his voice calm yet soft. When I booked a room at the Grand Crest, all I wanted was a quiet weekend. I didn't think my hat would be an issue, but maybe it was never really just about the hat, was it? He paused, scanning the faces in the crowd. Some looked empathetic, others skeptical, but everyone was listening. For some people, this hat represents something they believe in, something they're proud of. For others, it's a reminder of things they've experienced or things they fear. And honestly, I understand that. Symbols have power. They mean different things to different people. The crowd murmured in response. A mix of nods and arms crossed defensively. But here's what I want to say, Barron continued, his voice growing steadier. I didn't wear this hat to make a statement today. I wore it because it's a part of who I am, a part of my history. That doesn't mean I agree with everything it represents to everyone else. It just means it's part of my life, and I shouldn't have to explain that every time I walk into a room. The tension in the air began to ease, replaced by a sense of curiosity. People leaned in, eager to hear more. What happened at the hotel wasn't just about me, Barron said. It was about how we see each other, about how quick we are to judge someone based on one thing: a hat, a name, a background. But we're all more than that, aren't we? Protesters on both sides exchanged glances, and a few slowly nodded. Jameson, standing off to the side, gave Barron a subtle look of approval. "I'm not here to change your minds about politics or policies," Barron said. "I'm here to ask you to think about the person standing in front of you, not the symbol you think they represent. Because if we can't do that, then what are we even fighting for?" A round of applause broke out, hesitant at first but gradually growing stronger. Barron glanced toward the reporters, their cameras still capturing every word and moment. The crowd began to disperse, the tension giving way to thoughtful murmurs and quiet conversations. Protesters lowered their signs and some even started talking to those they had been opposing just minutes earlier. The media captured this shift, with headlines now taking a different tone, focusing on the unexpected turn of events. As Barron left the scene, he felt lighter, freer. He hadn't solved all the world's problems, but he had taken a step toward understanding his place in it. And perhaps, just maybe, he had helped others do the same. The story of Barron Trump and the MAGA hat wasn't just a tale of political conflict. It became a lesson about how we perceive one another, the power of honest dialogue, and the importance of looking beyond symbols to see the real people behind them. In our increasingly polarized world, perhaps this is what we need to remember most, that behind every symbol, every label, is a person with their own story. And only when we're willing to listen to those stories can we begin to build bridges instead of walls. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thoughtful content exploring the human stories behind the headlines. Share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think about the power of symbols in our lives? How can we overcome the barriers they sometimes create? Have you ever experienced being judged based on a symbol you wore or represented? Your voice matters. Share your thoughts and join the conversation. And don't forget to like and share if you found this story meaningful.